The man who swears you mean nothing to him is the same man who can't go 3 days without finding a reason to contact you. The person who says he doesn't need anyone somehow needs to know where you are, what you're doing, who you're with. Here's the truth that's going to flip everything you thought you knew. When you become a man's hidden addiction, he doesn't pursue openly, he orbits secretly. He doesn't confess his need, he disguises it as coincidence. And he doesn't make his dependency obvious, he makes it look like choice. Today we're exposing the 9 undeniable signs that prove you've become his hidden addiction, the person he can't function without but will never admit he needs. These aren't the surface level signs everyone talks about, no simple he always texts back observations. We're diving into the deep psychological patterns, the compulsive behaviors, and the emotional contradictions he's powerless to control, no matter how much he pretends otherwise. Because here's what nobody tells you about male addiction to a woman. When you become truly essential to his emotional functioning, when you start controlling his mood and mental state without even trying, his instinct isn't to acknowledge it, it's to deny it. And that denial looks like casualness, like indifference, like he could take you or leave you. But his behavior will expose the lie every single time. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to identify when you've become someone's hidden addiction, how to recognize the compulsive patterns he can't hide, and why the man who acts most casual about you might be the one who's most dependent on you. So settle in, stay until the very end, because what you're about to learn will give you the ability to see through the performance and recognize the truth. Here's the thing about men, an emotional addiction that changes everything. When a man realizes he's become emotionally dependent on a woman, it doesn't bring him peace. It creates panic. And panic makes men do the exact opposite of what you'd expect. Most women think that when a man is addicted to them, he becomes more obvious about it, more committed, more willing to define things. But here's the psychology that shatters that assumption. When a man recognizes that someone has become necessary to his emotional stability, his first response is to fight that dependency. And the easiest way to fight dependency? Pretend it doesn't exist. It's not cruelty, it's fear. Deep down, he's thinking, if I can act like she's optional, maybe I'll believe she's optional. If I can prove I don't need her validation, then maybe I'll stop craving it constantly. If I can treat this casually, then maybe these feelings will become casual too. But here's the beautiful contradiction. The harder he fights his addiction to you, the more obvious it becomes to anyone who understands the patterns. Science explains this perfectly. When we become emotionally addicted to someone, our brain creates the same neural pathways as substance addiction. Dopamine floods our system when we interact with them. Withdrawal symptoms appear when they're absent. We develop tolerance, needing more contact to get the same emotional high. But unlike admitting to a coffee addiction, admitting emotional dependency on another person feels like giving away all your power. So what does he do? He overcompensates with independence. He creates space to prove he doesn't need proximity. He acts unbothered to hide how much your mood affects his mood. He becomes inconsistent to mask how consistently he's thinking about you. This internal battle between what he needs and what he shows creates patterns that are impossible to miss once you know what you're looking for. And here's why this matters so deeply. His addiction isn't just about liking you. It's about you having become essential to his sense of well-being. You're not just someone he enjoys. You're someone his brain has decided it needs to function properly. And that level of emotional dependency is something most men would rather die than admit, especially to themselves. Understanding this psychology is everything. Because once you know that his casual behavior might actually be his addiction in disguise, you can start recognizing the real signs. The signs he can't fake, can't conceal, and can't control. And that's exactly what we're about to break down. The first sign that you've become his hidden addiction shows up in something so subtle, most women completely overlook it. He creates reasons to be in your orbit, constantly, even when there's no logical reason for contact. And here's what makes this so powerful. Addicts don't stay away from their addiction. They find ways to justify proximity, no matter how unnecessary. When you've become his hidden addiction, you'll notice he manufactures opportunities for interaction. He asks questions he already knows the answers to. He sends memes or articles with "thought you'd like this," when really he just needed an excuse to reach out. He shows up to events he wouldn't normally attend because you mentioned you'd be there. You'll see it in how he structures his routine around potential contact with you. If you're at the gym on Tuesday mornings, suddenly his workout schedule shifts to Tuesday mornings. If you grab coffee at a specific place, that becomes his new favorite spot. These aren't accidents. They're the behavior of someone who's engineered their life around access to their addiction. Here's what's fascinating about this pattern. Addiction creates seeking behavior. When something becomes necessary to our emotional regulation, we unconsciously reorganize our lives to ensure consistent access to it. His brain has categorized time with you as essential, so it drives him to create that time, even while his conscious mind tells him to play it cool. What makes this even more telling is how consistent this pattern becomes. It's not just one random reach out. It's a constant stream of small, seemingly casual contacts that add up to a pattern of someone who can't actually stay away. Every few days, sometimes every few hours, he finds a reason, a question, a thought, a memory, anything that gives him permission to enter your space. So if you've noticed this pattern, if you've seen how he always finds a way back into your orbit, no matter how much time passes, you're witnessing one of the clearest signs of hidden addiction. Addicts don't stay away. They can't. But as revealing as manufactured proximity is, the next sign goes even deeper into his dependency. Because when you've become his hidden addiction, his entire emotional state becomes linked to your availability and attention. And that's where the addiction becomes impossible to hide. When a man is secretly addicted to you, your responsiveness directly affects his mood in ways that are obvious to everyone around him. His emotional state becomes a direct reflection of whether he's gotten his fix of you lately. You might notice that he's noticeably different on days when you've been responsive versus days when you've been distant. If you've been texting, if you've been warm, if you've given him attention, he's lighter, more positive, more energized. But when you pull back, when you're busy, when you don't respond quickly, his entire energy shifts. He becomes quieter, more irritable, more withdrawn. This happens because addiction creates emotional dependency. When someone becomes our addiction, they become our mood regulator. Their presence, their attention, their approval, these things directly impact our brain chemistry. And for him, you've become that regulator. Your availability determines his dopamine levels. Here's what's particularly revealing about this pattern. He might try to hide it. He might pretend your silence doesn't bother him, but watch his behavior closely. When you've been distant, does he suddenly become more active on social media, posting things you might see? Does he reach out to mutual friends? Does he find reasons to be visible in your world? These are withdrawal behaviors. When an addict can't access their substance directly, they create indirect pathways. They increase visibility, hoping to trigger contact. They can't just sit with your absence peacefully because your absence creates genuine discomfort. So if you've noticed his mood rises and falls with your attention, if you've seen how your distance affects his energy, if you've watched him struggle when you pull back, you're not dealing with someone who casually likes you. You're dealing with someone who's become dependent on you for emotional regulation. But mood dependency is just one layer. The next sign reveals something even more compulsive about his addiction, something that shows up in how he monitors your life even from a distance. Here's where his hidden addiction becomes crystal clear. When you've become his addiction, he develops an almost obsessive awareness of your life, your schedule, your activities, your social world. And I'm not talking about healthy interest. I'm talking about detailed knowledge that reveals constant monitoring. You'll notice he knows things about your life that you don't remember telling him. He knows your work schedule without you sharing it repeatedly. He knows when you're traveling, when you're busy, when you have important events. He knows your friends' names, your co-worker situations, your family dynamics. This level of detail comes from someone who's constantly paying attention. This happens because addiction creates hypervigilance. When someone becomes our addiction, information about them becomes incredibly valuable to our brain. Every detail gets stored, cataloged, analyzed. His mind treats information about you the way a stock trader treats market data. Here's what's even more revealing. He often knows things about you from sources you didn't directly provide. He's clearly checking your social media with detective-level focus. He notices when you post, what you post, who comments, who you interact with. He picks up information from mutual friends. He remembers things from group conversations that everyone else forgot. What makes this behavior so telling is its selectivity. Men don't monitor everyone's life like this. His brain isn't storing detailed information about all his friends or his co-workers or the women in his life. But with you, he's somehow aware of everything. That level of attention only happens with addiction. So if you've noticed he knows too much, remembers too much, seems too aware of the details of your life, you're witnessing the surveillance behavior of someone who can't stop paying attention. And addicts always pay attention to their addiction. But monitoring your life is just the beginning. The next sign reveals how his addiction shows up in his physical behavior, in ways his body betrays what his words deny. When you've become his hidden addiction, his body language around you becomes completely different from how he is with everyone else. And here's what makes this impossible to fake. Body language is controlled by parts of the brain he can't consciously override, no matter how good his poker face is. You'll notice that when you're in the same space, his body automatically orients toward you. Even if he's talking to someone else, even if he's supposedly focused on something different, his feet point in your direction. His shoulders angle toward you. His position in the room somehow always keeps you in his line of sight. Watch what happens when you move. Does he adjust his position to maintain visual access to you? When you leave a room, does he find reasons to leave shortly after? These are involuntary responses that happen because you trigger his nervous system differently than anyone else. Here's what's fascinating about this pattern. When someone becomes our addiction, our body treats their presence as significant stimulus. Our pupils dilate when we see them. Our heart rate changes. Our breathing shifts slightly. These are physiological responses to a reward stimulus. The same responses an addict has when they encounter their substance. Science explains this beautifully. When we're addicted to someone, physical proximity to them releases oxytocin and dopamine. Our body literally rewards us for being near them. So his body unconsciously seeks that reward by constantly positioning itself in your orbit. So if you've noticed his body always finds you in a room, if his physical presence seems magnetically pulled toward yours, if his entire physical energy changes when you're around, you're watching the involuntary responses of someone whose body has become addicted to your presence. But body language is just one way his addiction leaks out. The next sign reveals how his addiction shows up in his defensiveness, especially when anyone threatens his access to you, where his hidden addiction becomes impossible to conceal. When you've become his addiction, he develops a protective, almost possessive reaction to anyone who might interfere with his access to you. And I'm not talking about healthy boundaries, I'm talking about defensive behavior that reveals how threatened he feels by the idea of losing you. You might notice he becomes subtly critical of other men who show interest in you. He questions their intentions. He points out their flaws. He finds reasons why they're not good enough, not trustworthy, not right for you. This happens because other men represent competition for his addiction. Watch what happens when you mention dating someone else, or when another man's name comes up repeatedly. Does he suddenly become more present? Does his contact increase? Does he find reasons to remind you of his value? These are panic responses from someone who's feeling the potential loss of their emotional fix. You'll also notice he becomes defensive when you pull away or create distance. If you take a break from contact, if you set a boundary, if you need space, his reaction is disproportionate to what the situation would warrant for a casual connection. He might get cold, hurt, accusatory, or suddenly very available. What's even more telling is how he reacts to the idea of you not needing him. If you solve a problem without him, if you're happy without his input, if you seem fine during a period of distance, it bothers him. Because his addiction isn't just about wanting you. It's about being needed by you. So if you've noticed he gets defensive about other men, if he reacts strongly to your boundaries, if he seems threatened by your independence, you're witnessing the protective behavior of someone who's addicted to their position in your world. But defensiveness is just the surface. The next sign reveals something even more telling about his addiction, how he cycles between extremes in ways that mirror classic addiction patterns. When you've become his hidden addiction, his behavior toward you cycles in patterns that are textbook addiction behavior. And I'm not talking about normal ups and downs. I'm talking about distinct cycles of intensity and withdrawal that happen because he's trying to manage his dependency. You'll notice periods where he's extremely present, attentive, warm, connected. During these phases, he's giving in to his addiction. He's allowing himself contact, allowing himself the dopamine hit of your attention and interaction. But then, almost predictably, he pulls back. He becomes distant, less responsive, cooler. During these phases, he's trying to break the addiction. He's attempting to prove to himself that he doesn't need you, that he can function without your attention. that he's still in control. This happens because addiction creates internal conflict. Part of him craves the connection. But another part of him fears the dependency, fears the loss of control, fears what it means that someone has this much power over his emotional state. Here's what's fascinating about this pattern. The cycles become predictable once you recognize them. After a period of intense connection, you can almost anticipate the withdrawal. And after a period of distance, you can predict when he'll resurface, needing another hit of connection with you. You might also notice that his withdrawals get harder for him over time. The first few times he pulls away, he might manage days or weeks, but gradually the time between contacts shortens. He comes back faster. The pull becomes stronger. This is tolerance building, another hallmark of addiction. But here's what most women miss about these cycles. They think the withdrawal phases mean he doesn't care, when actually they mean he cares so much it scares him. He's not pulling away because you don't matter. He's pulling away because you matter too much. So if you've noticed this pattern of intensity, followed by distance, of warmth, followed by coldness, you're not dealing with someone who's confused about whether they like you. You're dealing with someone who's trying and failing to manage their addiction to you. But cycling behavior is just one dimension. The next sign reveals how his addiction shows up in his need for reassurance, even while he pretends not to care about your opinion. Here's where his hidden addiction becomes undeniable. When you've become his addiction, he develops a constant need for reassurance from you, validation from you, confirmation that he still matters to you. And I'm not talking about obvious neediness. I'm talking about subtle, repeated testing to make sure his supply is still available. You'll notice he fishes for validation in ways that seem casual but are actually calculated. He might mention other women being interested in him, not because he's bragging, but because he wants to see your reaction. He might talk about his accomplishments, his qualities, his value, while watching to see if you affirm them. This happens because addiction creates insecurity. When someone becomes essential to our emotional well-being, we become paranoid about losing them. We need constant confirmation that they're still ours, still available, still interested. Here's what's particularly revealing about this pattern. He asks for reassurance about whether you care, whether you're seeing anyone else, whether you still think about him. But he frames these questions casually. These aren't just questions, they're checks to make sure his addiction source is still accessible. Watch what happens when you don't provide the reassurance he's fishing for. Does he ask again in different ways? Does he seem thrown off? Your validation has become something he needs to feel stable, and when he doesn't get it, he feels the withdrawal immediately. You might also notice he gets particularly bothered when you validate other men, especially in front of him. If you compliment someone else, if you laugh at someone else's jokes, if you give attention to someone else, his reaction is telling. This is an addict watching someone else get the supply he's dependent on. So if you've noticed he fishes for validation, if he seems to need confirmation of his importance to you, if your approval noticeably affects him, even when he pretends it doesn't, you're witnessing the insecurity that comes with addiction. He needs you to need him because he needs you. But validation seeking is just one sign. The next reveals how his addiction shows up in the way he involves you in his life, even while claiming you're not that important. When you've become his hidden addiction, he unconsciously integrates you into his daily life and future plans in ways that contradict his casual claims. And here's what makes this so revealing. People don't build their lives around things that don't matter to them. You'll notice he starts sharing his daily experiences with you routinely, morning coffee thoughts, work frustrations, random observations, evening updates. He's essentially narrating his life to you, creating a continuous thread of connection throughout his day. Watch how he talks about future plans. Does he automatically include you in his thinking? We should check out that place. You'd love this thing I'm planning. He's not making formal invitations. He's revealing that his brain has already made you a permanent part of his imagined future. Here's what's particularly revealing. He shares things with you first, before other people, sometimes before anyone else. Good news, bad news, random thoughts, important updates. You've become his first point of contact, his primary audience, his default person. That position doesn't happen by accident. You might also notice he remembers your schedule better than you'd expect. He knows when you're busy, when you're free, what you have coming up. Not because he's keeping a formal calendar, but because his planning naturally accounts for your availability. What makes this sign particularly powerful is how it contradicts everything he says about what you mean to him. While claiming you're just friends, just casual, just whatever, He's simultaneously building his daily routine and future plans around your presence and availability. So if you've noticed, he shares everything with you. If he includes you in his future thinking, if his life seems structured around maintaining connection with you, you're not dealing with someone who's casually interested. You're dealing with someone who's made you essential to their daily functioning. But life integration is just one dimension. The final sign reveals the most profound truth about his hidden addiction, how he reacts when he thinks he might lose you. Here's the ultimate sign that you've become his hidden addiction, and it's the most powerful because it's the most honest. When he genuinely believes he might lose you, when he faces the real possibility of you being gone from his life, his entire facade crumbles, and that's when the truth comes out. You'll see this when you create real distance, not game playing distance, but actual boundaries or space. When you genuinely pull back, when you start moving on, when you become less available, his panic response reveals everything. Watch what happens when you start dating someone seriously, when you talk about moving away, when you mention life changes that would reduce your contact. Does he suddenly become more present, more honest, more willing to admit what he feels? These are the reactions of someone facing the loss of their addiction. This happens because the threat of permanent loss triggers survival level responses in his brain. All the fear that kept him from admitting his feelings gets overridden by the bigger fear of losing you entirely. And in that moment, his true dependency becomes impossible to hide. Here's what's fascinating about this pattern. The casual facade he's maintained, sometimes for months or years, can collapse in days when he believes you're really leaving. The "I don't need anyone" attitude transforms into "wait, we need to talk." The addiction he denied becomes the addiction he admits, because denial is less scary than loss. You might also notice that his reaction to potential loss is disproportionate to what the relationship officially is. If you're supposedly just friends, just casual, his reaction to you pulling away should be mild. But if his reaction is intense, if it involves strong emotions or desperate attempts to maintain contact, that reaction reveals the truth about what you actually mean to him. So if you've watched him panic when you created real distance, if you've seen him suddenly become honest when faced with losing you, if his behavior completely changes when he thinks you're moving on, you're witnessing the clearest possible proof of his hidden addiction. What you shouldn't do is doubt yourself. If you've seen these signs, if you've felt that pattern, if you've recognized these behaviors, trust your instincts. You're not imagining it. You're not overthinking it. You're recognizing the behavioral signature of a man who's made you central to his emotional functioning, whether he's ready to admit it or not. Before you go, I want you to know that understanding these patterns is just the beginning. If this video gave you clarity, if it helped you make sense of confusing behavior you've been experiencing, I create content like this every week. Deep dives into male psychology, relationship dynamics, and the hidden truths about attraction that most people never discover. Hit that like button if this resonated with you, subscribe for more insights like these, and let me know in the comments which of these signs you've experienced. Your story might help another woman understand her own situation. Remember, love isn't about confusion or mixed signals. It's about understanding, and now you have the tools to see the truth, even when it's hidden behind walls of fear, denial, and casual facades. The question isn't whether you're his addiction. The question is what you're going to do with that knowledge.